Namaskarams to one and all present here. We warmly welcome you all to today's talk by Shri V. Sriram as part of the Dikshitar 250 celebrations. Shri V. Sriram wears many hats, including that of a historian, a columnist, a researcher, and an entrepreneur. His talks about several aspects of culture and history are highly sought after and serve as an eye-opener into the Madras of the past. Shri V. Sriram is also one of the secretaries of the Madras Music Academy. Today, Shri V. Sriram would be presenting a talk on the Shishya parampara of Shri Muthuswami Dikshitar. I now request Shri Naresh Kirti to honor Shri V. Sriram on behalf of Guru Guhamrita as a token of our honor and appreciation. Thank you.
Good evening, friends. This presentation on Muthuswami Dikshitar's Shishya parampara, Ravi Kiran specifically asked me to work on this and present it. And because it was many months away, I very happily accepted. Then as I started working on it, I heartily first cursed him, then cursed myself, and then finally I came to fall in love with the subject. And it was a big journey of discovery to me. And I'm very grateful to Ravi Kiran for having suggested this topic, because without his having made me work on it, I would not have put together this presentation. It was something that where I learnt a lot on the disciple lineage of Muthuswami Dikshitar. So first, the sources that I have used for this presentation: the Vagayakara Charitramu of Subbaraya Dikshitar, 1904, translated into English by Dr. Ramakausalya of the Marabu Foundation in 2007. The Karunamrita Sagaram of Abraham Panditar, 1917. And prior to this, there is a book called Gayaka Siddhanjanam of Tachur Singaracharlu brothers, where the information that is given here is essentially the identical between the two books. Tanjore Perudayan Perisai of Tanjore K. Ponnaya Pillai, Sangeeta Kalanidhi K. Ponnaya Pillai, republished in 1964. Isai Ulagil Mahavaidyanatha Sivan of V.S. Gomati Shankar Iyer. Muthuswami Dikshitar, the monograph of Dr. V. Raghavan, published by the National Center of Performing Arts, Bombay. 3 books by Shri B.M. Sundaram, Marabu Tanda Manikangal, Mangala Isai Mannargal, Bharata Peer Asangal. And then a collection of Sulamangalam Vaidyanatha Bhagavatar's writings, which were translated into English in under a title called Cameos, and was published in 2005. Then the Music Academy archives had 3 volumes of a magazine called Sangeeta Abhimani, dating to 1935-1936. In that, there was some valuable information. Then the journals of the Music Academy, of course, and then Shri T.R. Arvind, who is a young scholar, who's done a lot of work in recent years in looking at manuscripts. So I'm very grateful to him also for the information that he has shared with me. Muthuswami Dikshitar led a very unusual life in his time. Certainly in his time, there was probably no contemporary who had traveled the extent that he had done. And he passed away in 1835, as we all know. In 1836, the second oldest trade body of India, called the Madras Chamber of Commerce, was founded. And 10 years later, they did a survey of roads in Madras Presidency. And in that survey report, they have published that the roads of this entire region are the most unsafe that you can ever find. And there were rapacious tax collectors at every village entrance and exit. And nobody ever stirred out of their villages. So this was 10 years after Muthuswami Dikshitar had passed away. So when we look at this personality and his family, which had traveled from, first of all, the father had traveled all the way from Kanchipuram down to Tiruvarur, then the son, and then the family comes back to Madras, then the son travels all the way to Varanasi and then comes back. From here, they go all around this North Arcot region, then they travel downwards to Tiruvarur, then from there to Kumbakonam, Mayavaram, so on, finally reaching Ettayapuram. I'm sure when Dikshitar must have looked back on his life, he must have himself marveled at the distances that he had traveled and the places that he had seen. And therefore, the list of disciples of Muthuswami Dikshitar are also scattered. They are all over the place. Unlike what we see in the case of Tyagaraja, there is a Balajapet school, there is a Thillaisthanam school, Tirunaidanam is so close to Tiruvayyaru, there is an Umayalpuram school, where it's all, they came together, they were with Tyagaraja in Tiruvayyaru, lot of stability. Whereas here, there is a lot of travel, there's a lot of movement happening all the time. Subbaraya Dikshitar gives us a list of disciples of Muthuswami Dikshitar in his Vageyakara Charitramu in Sangita Sampradaya Pradarshini. And these are the notes that he gives along with it. Thirukadayur Bharati, a scholar in music and Tamil. Audayar Kovil Veena Venkatramayya. He says that he was a very talented Veena player. That is also included in it. Thevur Subramanya Ayya. Tiruvarur Shuddhamaddalam Thambiyappan, competent in Lakshya Lakshanas of music and Mridangam. Tanjavur Ponnaya, an expert in Bharata Shastra, Vadivelu. Kurainadu Ramaswamy, a Vidwan competent in the Lakshya Lakshanas of Bharatanatyam. Tiruvalanduru Bilvavanam, this is what is given in the book, an eminent Nagaswaram player. Tiruvarur Ayyaswamy, composer of Thanavarnas and Padas. Tiruvarur Kamalam, famous in the arts of Natya and Sangeeta. Vallalar Kovil Ammani, a famous singer. So these are the list of disciples as given in Subbaraya Dikshitar's book. In today's analysis, Dikshitar would fulfill the DEI criteria of disciples eminently. I don't think anybody else could have done it. You name the categorization, he's got all of them there. Now, this itself throws up a certain set of questions. Before that, you can also group these disciples into certain clusters based upon where they lived, based upon their ancestry. So, this is something that I have done. This is not something based on this is my own interpretation. So there is a Tiruvarur cluster, because very close to Tiruvarur is Thirukadayur, which is, as we all know, the famous Kshetram where Shiva is Kalasamhara Murti. Then there is Thevur, which is just an adjunct of Kilvelur, which is very close to Tiruvarur. Then there is Tiruvarur Ayyasamy, Thambiyappan and Kamalam, they were all in Tiruvarur themselves. So this I call it as a Tiruvarur cluster. Then there is a Mayiladuthurai cluster, which is in and around Mayuram. So Kurainadu is just on the outskirts of Mayavaram town itself. So Kurainadu is there. Vallalar Kovil is Uttara Mayuram, which is just on the northern side of Mayuram itself, where Ammani was from, obviously. Now, this Tiruvilanduru Bilvavanam is interpreted in two ways by people. One is, he was Ter Azhundur Bilvavanam, which is a Divya Desam. He is also Thiru Indalur Bilvavanam, which is a Divya Desam right inside Mayavaram, where Parimala Ranganatha Swami is. Now, I have chosen to interpret it as Thiru Indalur Bilvavanam, because when you read the Telugu, and R.K. Sriram Kumar is the one who read it out to me and told me exactly how it is written. So, Thiru Indaluru, it seems to be that he is from Thiru Indalur itself. Then we have got the Tanjavur cluster, which is Ponnaya and Vadivelu. Interestingly, Chinnaya and Sivanandam are not mentioned by Subbaraya Dikshitar in his book. So, while we consider that the Tanjore Quartet were all disciples of Muthuswami Dikshitar, Chinnaya and Sivanandam seem to be eliminated in his. The one exception that I could not place in any cluster is Audayar Kovil Veena Venkatramayya, because that is in Pudukkottai district on the way to Chettinad, so Tiruperundurai, where Manika Vachakar is so closely associated with that place. So that is the one exception that I could not place him anywhere. Now, other general observation, as I said, the Brahmin element is minimal in his disciple list. Whereas when you read Tyagaraja's list of disciples, you will find that even the Patnulu, Saurashtra Brahmins, other Brahmins, that is the largely dominant element that you will find. Also, it is very interesting that the predominance is of music and dance professionals. So, Nagaswarakara, Nattuvanar, Devadasis. These seem to be essentially the people to whom Dikshitar was imparting his music. The question, therefore, arises, was he professionally engaged to teach them? This is my question. This is not something that I have picked out from anywhere. I have always had this question: how did Dikshitar live? There must have been, other people have, people who have written about him have made it appear that every day he had to only sing and food would appear on the table. This is something that I, in my 21st century sinful living, I am not able to accept. I believe that he would have had to work very hard for making a living. And he probably did that by teaching people. And he was probably, this is my interpretation, once again I'm saying that. So was he professionally engaged to teach them? This is a question. The three clusters, so even assume that Tiruvarur was his own village, he was living there. Was he going to visit certain places to teach people? This is the other question that I have, because leave aside Tiruvarur, which was anyway the place where he was living and people were coming to learn. But what took him to Mayiladuthurai? Why were there three disciples in that particular area? We know for a fact that he moved to Tanjore in order to teach the quartet. And therefore, he was engaged for that particular activity. Therefore, that is why he went to Tanjore. So, was he therefore taking on disciples for a fee or for, kind, gifts in kind or whatever? And was he, there is nothing wrong in it. He was a professional. That's what I feel. And it is very likely that each disciple cluster became a repository for some compositions, which is why ultimately when the compositions were all being put together by Subbaraya and Dikshitar, it is very likely that some compositions were not known. They might have just vanished and they may have gone with some lineages and they would have just been talking about it, and after that they wouldn't have come through. Now the interesting thing is that in all these places, he has left behind some compositions. So in Tiruvarur, as we all know, massive set of compositions. Mayiladuthurai, Thiruvidai Marudur, that Thiru Indalur, that entire area, there is a set of compositions. Tanjavur has got a huge set of Dikshitar compositions because the Raganga Raga scheme, which Ravi Rajgopalan spoke about the other day on this very same stage, the Raganga Raga scheme of we have almost all the 72 of his. So those all appear to be, part of they were all composed in Tanjavur. So was he therefore composing in each of these locations and leaving behind music for his various disciples? So having come to that, let me take you through what I find from various sources about the various individuals whom we can list and we talk about. So we find that Tirukadayur Bharati was also a great Tamil scholar, and he was also a disciple of Muthuswami Dikshitar. In Subbaraya Dikshitar Sangeeta Sampradaya Pradarshini, he says Tirukadayur Bharati was also in the retinue of the Etayapuram Rajas. So at a certain point of time, Tirukadayur Bharati must have either come with Dikshitar or stayed on there later. And when Subbaraya Dikshitar composed Shankaracharyam and performed it before the Acharyas in Kumbakonam, he says that Tirukadayur Bharati was present in the audience and that he was part of the retinue of the Kumbakonam Acharyas at that time, and he also was one of the people who praised this particular composition. I'm just giving you snippets of information because that is all that we have. Beyond this, I'm not able to find much about any of these people. So this is one story. The next one is about Audayar Kovil Veena Venkatramaya. This visual, incidentally, is not from Audayar Kovil, it is from Madurai, but it is the story of Audayar Kovil, about the horses becoming jackals and the jackals becoming horses once again, so taken from Madurai. But Audayar Kovil Veena Venkatramaya, it just says that he was a great Veena player. That is the only thing that is mentioned in Subbaraya Dikshitar Sangeeta Sampradaya Pradarshini. After that, when you go to Abraham Panditar's book, and you read the list of Dikshitar disciples, and he has taken the entire list completely from the SSP. Suddenly you find this Audayar Kovil Veena Venkatramaya is missing, and there is a Vetanur Subbarayulu, who was a great Veena player. So then you begin to cross-refer in Abraham Pandidar to see where Vetanur Subbarayulu is mentioned. There is no Vetanur Subbarayulu mentioned anywhere. So obviously we take that as a error in printing. And then when you go reading further in Subbaram Dikshitar, you suddenly come Vetanur Veena Venkatramaya, a disciple of Muthuswami Dikshitar and a Veena player. Then I discovered that Vetanur is just outside Audayar Kovil. So in his time, probably because Audayar Kovil was a better known village or better known town, Vetanur was removed and it was replaced with the term Audayar Kovil. It can well be that. And the Gayaka Siddhanjanam of Tachur Singaracharlu brothers also refers to him only as Vetanur Veena Venkatramaya. The Tachur book incidentally refers to all Veena players as lutenists. And I keep reading it as lunatic. And this is a big problem that I have in the English translation. I wish they had used some other term and they hadn't put it as lutenist. But this, obviously, he was a good Veena player of his time. And interestingly, Abraham Panditar's book also says he had a son called Shwetaranya Iyer who was a good violinist. And when you go and read the entry under Shwetaranya Iyer, very simple, the son of Vetanur Venkatramaya, a good Veena player, disciple of Muthuswami Dikshitar. Nothing beyond that. So somewhere that lineage must have come to an end and there is nothing beyond that. We now come to Tevur Subramanya Iyer, who in the reading of SSP, we can see that when Dikshitar moved in the last phase of his life from Madurai to Ettayapuram, Tevur Subramanya Iyer was the disciple who went along with him. And he was present in Sattur or in that area when Muthuswami Dikshitar composed Anandamrita Karshini and the rain fell. Tevur Subramanya Iyer was present there. And after that, we also find that Tevur Subramanya Iyer stays on in Ettayapuram and becomes a part of the retinue of the Ettayapuram Rajas. So he was a musician in that particular court. I will leave Tevur Subramanya Iyer for the time being at this point, but there is more on him which will come in a short while in this presentation. Then we come to Shuddhamatalam Tambiyappa Pillai. So when you read T.L. Venkatramayer's in National Book Trust biography of Muthuswami Dikshitar, it says that Tambiyappa Pillai was the disciple to cure whose stomach ache Muthuswami Dikshitar composed Brihaspati. And then he went on to compose the rest of the Navagraha Kritis, which makes you wonder whether this was the first of the lot that he created. If so, because this fell in Triputatala, did he go back and work on Dhruva Matya Rupakam? This is a question that arises, but for which I don't have an answer. But Tambiyappa Pillai was very evidently a performer of the Shuddha Maddalam, the instrument that is still there in Tiruvarur, but now sadly kept in the museum in the temple. And he is also responsible for a long lineage that we will come to. So unlike Tirukadayur Bharati, Tevur Subramanya Iyer and Shuddha Maddalam Tambiyappa Pillai will be responsible for passing on the works of Muthuswami Dikshitar to subsequent generations. And then we come to a group of whom we have a lot of information, a lot of misinformation also. So that is the Tanjore Quartet. So Tanjore Quartet, as we all know, 4 brothers, Chinnaya, Ponnaya, Sivanandam and Vadivelu. The oldest born in 1802, that is Chinnaya, and the youngest born in 1810, that is Vadivelu. So 1802, 1804, 1808 and 1810. So this is the birth years of the 4 brothers. What is very interesting is that in Sivanandam's biography of the Tanjore Quartet, he says that the ancestors were Oduars and they were reciting the Tevarams in temples, and that is, but he does not explain the transition of how an Oduar family became Natuanars. And in fact, he completely removes the references to the Natuanars themselves. This is probably because, as we all know, between the 1940s, when the first edition by Sangeeta Kalanidhi Ponnaya Pillai came, and then in 64, when the second edition came, a lot of water had flown under the bridge as far as Devadasis and all were concerned, and perhaps the family was very keen on distancing itself from the Nattuvanar tradition. But when you read other works, particularly when you read B.M. Sundaram's Marabutanda Manikangal, he challenges this notion that they were Nattuvanars. And he says that the ancestry was, they were dance masters. There was a Sendilvel Annavi who was in Tirunelveli, and he was invited by the Tanjavur rulers to come and begin teaching dance. Sendilvel Annavi's descendants was Gangai Muthu Nattuvanar, and Gangai Muthu had a son called Subbaraya Nattuvanar, and Subbaraya's 4 children were these people, the Chinnaya, Ponnaya, Sivanandam and Vadivelu. But the interesting error that gets repeated very often, and I also noticed it in B.M. Sundaram's book, is that he says that King Tulaja invited Muthuswami Dikshitar to come to Tanjavur in order to teach music to the 4 children. But Tulaja died in 1788. Chinnaya was, so to speak, not even a beam in his father's eye at that point of time. He would come around only in 1802, by which time Sarfoji had been ruler for quite some time. So it's very clear that the movement, Muthuswami Dikshitar's travel to Tanjavur must have happened only in the 19th century and not in the 18th century. This is one point. Second point is, if Chinnaya himself was born in 1802, and let us assume that he was a prodigy and he was going to learn music from somebody like Dikshitar even at the age of 3, it's only by 1805 or 1806 that we can assume that Dikshitar would have made that journey to Tanjavur. What is also interesting is that there are some accounts that say that Dikshitar was present when the Brihadishwarar Kumbhabhishekam was conducted by Sarfoji. That was in 1803. So these dates somehow don't seem to match up at all. Was Dikshitar traveling to Tanjavur and going back to Thiruvarur, and then when the boys were of a certain age, did he come back? Did he then start teaching? So there are certain questions that we will have to park and we will have to leave them. But what is very clear is that he did teach, and the Tanjore Quartet, at least as Subbaraya Dikshitar says, Vadivelu and Ponnaya, both of them learned from him, and perhaps the others also did, we don't know. Certainly their family tradition has it that all the 4 of them learned. And they would leave their gratitude on record. Among the so many compositions that which are created, which are attributed to the quartet, and probably many of them were Ponnaya's works, there are 9 which contain laudatory and prayerful references to Muthuswami Dikshitar. They refer to him as Guru Guha, that is very clear. And there are 9 of them. The first one is Mayatita Swarupini. The second one is Sri Guru Guha Murtiki, Sri Karambulosaga, Sarasakshi, Paramapavani, Nidu Padame, Sri Raja Rajeshwari, Satileni Guru Guha Murtine, and Sare Kuni. Now what is very interesting is that in their tribute, they have used several elements of Muthuswami Dikshitar's compositions in their compositions. So it was just not mentioning him in a line and expressing their devotion. They were also using elements of Dikshitar's compositional style in order to pay. So there is tribute in the music, there is tribute in the lyric. So that is how they seem to have done it. So what I have done here is that Maya Malava Gaula and Rupaka is Mayatita Swarupini. That P is Pallavi, AP is Anupallavi. Now, we call it Samashti Charanam today, but in Subbaraya Dikshitar's SSP, the Samashti Charanams are referred to only as Pallavi, Anupallavi. So, the composition has got Pallavi, Anupallavi, Madhyama Kala Sahitya, of which Dikshitar was the pioneer, there is no doubt, and there is also Raga Mudra. And Mayatita Swarupini is in Maya Malava Gaula, the same raga in which Muthuswami Dikshitar's first composition is, and it is also very clear that this stylistically follows a lot of what is there in Srinathati Guru Guho Jayati. So the Sarali, then the Alankara Prayogas, they are all there in this composition as well. Then Sri Guruguha Murtiki is in Bhinnashadjam, Rupakam, Pallavi, Anupallavi, Charanam, Madhyamakala Sahityam in the Charanam and the Ragamudra. Shri Karambulosaga Kamboji Khandachapu does not have the Ragamudra. Pallavi, Anupallavi, Charanam and Madhyamakala. Sarasakshi has got Pallavi, Anupallavi, Ragamudra, and there is no Madhyamakala, but Chittaswaram is there. In fact, wherever they have not used Madhyamakala Sahityam, they have given a Chittaswaram. So perhaps that was meant to fulfill the function of a Madhyamakala Sahityam in that composition. Paramapavani in Varali, Pallavi, Anupallavi, Ragamudra and Chittaswaram. Needu Padame, Pantu Varali. In Ponnaya Pillai's book, it says the 51st Melakarta. But in the manuscript, it says 45th Melakarta. And Pantuvarali Raga name is there. Kamavardhini is not there. The Raga Mudra is given as Pantuvarali, so we know exactly where it was coming from. Sri Rajarajeshwari, in the book, it says Ramapriya, but in the Sahitya, the Mudra Rama Manohari is there. And Pallavi, Anupallavi, Madhyakala and Raga Mudra. Satileni Guruguha Murtine is given as Purvi Kalyani. It is given in the book Purvi Kalyani Mishra Chapu. But the indication is 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4 adikkanum. So Tishra Triputa is what he is writing. He's given it at the end. So he's following the Dikshitar tradition of Tishra Triputa, but he's written it as Mishra Chaputala. Arvind informs me that in the manuscript that is there with the Tanjore family, this is given as Nata. And the Nata word is there in the composition also. So somewhere along the line, there has been probably a transition in raga. Sarekuni, Chamaram, Rupakam, Pallavi, Anupallavi, Madhyamakala and Ragamudra, all are there. Now the lines that they have used in praise of Dikshitar. Mayatita Swarupini, Ma Guruguha Swami Kine Dasudaiti. I am a slave of our Guru Muthuswami Dikshitar. In fact, this is what Ponnaya Pillai writes as his explanation to say, they all four learnt, and Ponnaya in his composition said, I am a slave of our Guru, indicating that we were all together. Then Sri Guruguha Murtike ne Shishyudai Unnarura. So I am a disciple very clearly. Sri Karambulosaga Guruguha Bhaktudani Eninchi, and taking me to be a disciple of Guruguha, a devotee of Guruguha, you shower your blessings on me. Sarasakshi ni Tanayudaina Guruguha Sad Bhaktuni Brovu. Consider me to be a devotee of your son Guruguha. So, because Muthuswami Dikshitar himself is so closely associated with Subramanya Swami, so this similarly, Guruguha Bhakta Chintamani in Paramapavani, Needu Padame Sri Guruguha Sri Dasu Danuchu Nannu Bromu. Consider me to be a slave of Muthuswami Dikshitar and protect me. So these are the expressions that they use. And Satileni Guruguha Murti ne Natun, this is where the Nata is supposed to be. So, Natanunti Namminanu. From then I have been thinking about you and I believe in you. So these are some of the expressions that are there. So the Tanjore Quartet's devotion to Muthuswami Dikshitar is very clearly documented and very clearly evident. Let's now go to Mayiladuthurai, where we look at Kurainadu Bharatam Ramasamy Pillai. Kurainadu Bharatam Ramasamy Pillai is credited as the composer of several Varnas, and there is a lecture demonstration by a Tirupamburam Sivasubramanya Pillai in Music Academy in 1979, where it says that he was a scholar in Tamil, Telugu, Sanskrit. He composed Sthana Varnas, he composed Kritis, he composed Ragamalikas. And 3 compositions have been listed in the Music Academy journal of that year, saying these were presented. Varavenum in Raga Gaula, a Kriti in Kannada, and Nannu Palimpa in Sri Raga. These are the 3 compositions of Kurainadu Ramasamy Pillai which have been presented. Somebody has actually come and sung it in 1979 in the Music Academy. Beyond this textual reference, we don't know anything. And 3 compositions which were sung in 1979, we don't even have the lyrics for it today in 2025. So in front of our eyes, a solid chunk of our musical heritage has just vanished. Bharatam Ramasamy Pillai's son was Kurenadu Natesa Pillai. Of his, there are several Varnams that are even now current, and that is there, but we'll just come to that in a short while. Nothing about Tiruvalanduru Bilvavanam except that he was a Nagaswaram player. Beyond that, we don't have any information. Thiruvarur Ayyasamy Nattuvanar, again, there is only one Varnam that is there in public circulation, which is a Begada Varnam. Other than that, all it says that he was a Nattuvanar who was teaching in Thiruvarur. He is also credited by Subbaraya Dikshitar as a composer of several Thanavarnas and Kritis, but we don't seem to have any. When you read B.M. Sundaram's lineage of this family, you realize that he had only daughters. And probably what he had done just went away along with him and nothing ever came out of it thereafter. Then we have the two women, Thiruvarur Kamalam. Incidentally, I must explain to you that this is, of course, the Tiruvindalur temple. This is a painting that is there in the Thiruvarur temple in the Devashraya Mantapam of a Nattuvanar walking behind a dancer, which is why I used it. And this is again procession of the Agaraja Swami coming out is also in the Devashraya Mantapam. You can see a Nattuvanar keeping time, and there is a woman dancing. So I just put it up as an interpretation of Kamalam. So all we know is that Kamalam belonged to the Kondi parampara, and therefore she must have been a Swami Kovil Dasi and not an Amman Kovil Dasi. So there in Thiruvarur, these, what you may call it, these gradations and these departments were all very clear. The Swami Kovil Dasi will dance only in the Tyagecha Sannadhi. Amman Kovil Dasi will only dance in front of Kamalamba. She can come to the Swami temple, but she cannot do any mudra and murai and all over there. So very clearly, Kamalam was a Swami temple Dasi. There is a description by B.M. Sundaram of a woman called Jnanam who came from the same family. And he says that she used to wear only Rudraksha and no other jewelry, and she used to dance. So when you read, there is one kriti of Muthuswami Dikshitar where he says, Vimala Rudra Ganika Nartana Priyena in one composition it is there. And when you read Saskia Karsanboom stories, Nitya Sumangali, where she interviews the Devadasis of Thiruvarur, they say that the Rudra Ganikas used to wear only Rudraksha and no other jewelry when they would dance. They would wear only white and wear Rudraksham and come to dance in front of Tyagesha. So probably, that was the tradition that is being referred to. Then we have Vallalar Kovil Ammani. The Vallalar Kovil is in Mayuram. We have a composition, Vadanyeshwaram, which is not in the SSP, but at the same time, it is a great composition. There is no doubt about it. Sadly, we don't know anything about this woman. When he was teaching her, did he compose this piece? Did he compose this piece? We have no idea. Now we come to some of the great lineages. So let's start with Tevur Subramanya. This is, I have said what I know about the direct disciples. Now I'm trying to trace how the Kritis came into public circulation from these various disciples who have been listed. So Tevur Subramanya Ayya, the Sangeeta Abhimani in 1936 carries an obituary, not an obituary, it carries a tribute to Ettayapuram Ramachandra Bhagavatar. And it very clearly says that he was the son of Tevur Subramanya Ayya of Ettayapuram, who was a direct disciple of Muthuswami Dikshitar. So there we know it was coming from there. And Ettayapuram Ramachandra Bhagavatar had a brother called Kodandapani Bhagavatar. We all know that Malakota Govindsamy Pillai learnt his fiddle from Kodandapani Bhagavatar. So probably the violin tradition, which was also coming along with Dikshitar, there was Baluswami, there was also Vadivelu. So probably Tevur Subramanya Ayya's line was carrying on the violin tradition as well. Now, Ettayapuram Ramachandra Bhagavatar in the tribute, and it's an anonymous tribute. Now, we don't know, 3 pages, extensive personality profile of this person. It says he was the first Sabha secretary of Madras. It says in the 1880s he came to Madras. There were no Sabhas here. He wanted to organize concerts and he was the first organizer of music programs in this city, very clearly. And then it says he was an indefatigable teacher. Everywhere he went in order to teach people his music. And therefore just read the list of disciples. Simiji Sundaram Iyer. From Simiji Sundaram Iyer, we know Mudikondan Venkatrama Iyer learnt. Madurai Pushpavanam Iyer, he was a disciple of Ettayapuram Ramachandra Bhagavatar. Apparently, he traveled to Kanchipuram in order to teach Dhanakoti Ammal Dikshitar Kritis. So, Kanchipuram Dhanakoti, from there, Nayana Pillai, who was her nephew, from him, Chittur Subramanya Pillai and Brinda Mukta. Then we've got Rajam Bhagavatar, who Maduramani Iyer himself has said was a disciple of Ettayapuram Ramachandra Bhagavatar, and Maduramani Iyer learned from him. So clearly, Ettayapuram Ramachandra Bhagavatar was a very important person from whom the Dikshitar Kritis were being disseminated and they were coming out into public circulation. Then we have three lineages. One is Koranadu Ramasamy Pillai, whom I spoke about. Now, Kurenadu Natesa Pillai, his son, was also a Nattuvanar just like the father. And then apparently there was an unsavory incident somewhere in Thiruvarur, whereupon he gave up being a Nattuvanar and he became a Nagaswaram artist. He trained to become a Nagaswaram artist at the age of 31, which just goes to show that it is never too late to make a change. Apparently everybody laughed at him for having decided to take up the Nagaswaram, and he not only took it up, he became a great artist. He lived up to the age of 96 and he was known as Kurenadu Tata. And this person apparently had composed 116 Varnams, of which they were all in Telugu lyrics. And later on, when Annamalai University was looking for compositions, Chittur Subramanya Pillai and Tirupamburam Swaminatha Pillai went to the house of Natesa Pillai and asked for the manuscripts. The family, I believe, said most of it has been burnt in the stove. We've got some left. So whatever they got, Chittur Subramanya Pillai and Swaminatha Pillai, they wrote Tamil lyrics for it and published it. And nowhere is it acknowledged that Natesa Pillai was the man who created the original music. So if we read that music, perhaps we will have an idea as to some amount of whether there is any vestige of Muthuswami Dikshitar's music in it. Tirupamburam Nataraja Sundaram Pillai, whom we will come to in a few minutes, also learned from Swaminatha Pillai, and Swaminatha Pillai learned from Kuranadu Natesa Pillai. Then you've got Tanjore Quartet, whom I have already spoken about. I have already mentioned to you about Svetaranya Iyer, the son of Audayar Kovil Veena Venkatramayya. Then we come to Shuddha Maddalam Tambia Pillai. Now the surprise to me was that this man was living in Madras. This Sulamangalam Vaidyanatha Bhagavatar, in his biography of him, just 5 lines, he says he came to Madras and was a great teacher over here. I thought this, when you the name like, I didn't mean him. I mean his disciple, Satanur Panchanatha Iyer. So, Suddhamadalam Thambiyappa Pillai lived in Thiruvarur. He had a disciple called Satanur Panchanatha Iyer. In Dr. V. Raghavan's monograph, he says Satanur Panchanatha Iyer was a disciple of Dikshitar himself. But this is not corroborated by other sources. They are very clear that Satanur Panchanatha Iyer learned from Suddhamadalam Thambiyappa Pillai. And he had a stellar list of students. Tirukodi Krishna Iyer, Veena Dhanammal, from whom the Dhanam daughters and grandchildren, Tirupamburam Nataraja Sundaram Pillai, from whom we have Tirupamburam family. And the surprise was, of course, C.S. Jayaraman, the film most associated with Tamil Isai and film music, who also comes from the lineage of Sundaram Pillai, who also learned from Satanur Panchanatha Iyer. Now, Tirupamburam Nataraja Sundaram Pillai would in 1936 published Dikshitar Kirtana Prakashika, which is the first publication in Tamil of Muthuswami Dikshitar compositions. And in the preface, he says that he also consulted Veena Dhanam in order to check the veracity of the notations that he used, because they were both learning from the same guru. And so that also, and the family tradition, T. Shankaran writes in Shruti that when they met after a long time, Veena Dhanam and Nataraj Sundaram Pillai, they sang together and found there was not a single variation between her Patantra and his Patantra. And they paid tribute to their guru at that moment, saying, look at how he has taught us our music, that we have been able to carry it forward, and we are meeting after so long, and we are able to still sing the same way. Then we have, I've intentionally not, brought the family in because they were living with him. So, but it is also a Shishya parampara. So, Baluswami Dikshitar was his younger brother. In Subbaraya Dikshitar's book, he writes that Jagadvira Rama Venkateswara Yeddappa, who was the ruler of Ettayapuram, he learnt the veena from Baluswami Dikshitar. So, he would have definitely been a disciple. Of course, today, ever since the late S. Balachandar, any king composing is viewed with great doubts. அவருக்கு இவர் தான் பாட்டு எழுதியிருப்பார். It's interesting that there is a, before Balachandar and after Balachandar. Before Balachandar, all kings were considered to be great composers. After Balachandar, no king is considered to be. Jayachamaraj Udayarna, oh, Mysore Vasudevachar only did. Swati Tirunalna, Tanjore Quartet. Etayapura, Balaswami Dikshitar. I don't know, the truth must be somewhere in between the two. But it is very clear that this Raja, and there are lots of Etayapuram ruler compositions also. In Isai Ulagil Mahavaidyanatha Sivan, Vasudevanallur Subaya Bhagavatar writes that Mahavaidyanatha Iyer went to Etayapuram and there spent a lot of time and heard Subbaraya Dikshitar sing Dikshitar Kritis, and then just absorbed them and presented them to Subbaraya Dikshitar in a concert. He also says that Subbaraya Dikshitar was not very happy with what Mahavaidyanatha Sivan had done. But he heard it again and then he realized that the flavor of the composition was intact. Therefore, it was left. But what is interesting is that such a hardcore Tyagaraja tradition man like Mahavaidyanatha Iyer, he would bring to the fore, every concert of his began with Vatapi Ganapatim and Kanchadalayatакши, Chintayama Kandamula Kandam. These were all compositions that were brought out by Mahavaidyanatha Iyer. So perhaps he had absorbed them from Subbaraya Dikshitar. When we talk of Subbaraya Dikshitar, we can never forget A.M. Chinnasamy Mudaliar, without whom the Sangeeta Sampradaya Pradarshini itself would have never happened. But that's a long story. I am not getting into that. Subbaraya Dikshitar's son, Ambi Dikshitar, would come to Madras. And from then, we know that there is a long lineage. T.L. Venkatarama Iyer, who learnt from him, and from him, B. Rajam Sandhyavandanam Srinivasa Rao. Then the Calcutta school. This year we have TTK awardees with us, Jayaraj and Jayashri, the Calcutta school. So, Ananta Krishna Iyer, and then his brother Sundaram Iyer. It's actually, Sundaram Iyer would publish the Guru Guha book series, with so many songs of Muthuswami Dikshitar coming out. And that is when many of those compositions would come into public circulation. Kalpakam Swaminathan would trace her lineage to that. Then we had Kalidakurchi Vedanta Bhagavatar and his brother Ramalinga Bhagavatar. S. Rajam, who learned from Ambi Dikshitar directly and took a lot of pride in the veracity of his patantara of it. And then D.K. Patamal. So this is one more line that has emerged from that. So I now come to the final slide where, these are all names that come from scattered readings. So, for instance, in B.M. Sundaram, we have the name of Tiruvarur Muthuswami Nattuvanar, who apparently was an uncle of Ayyasami Nattuvanar. And he had also learned from Muthuswami Dikshitar. Similarly, he says that the composer Tiruvarur Ramasamy Pillai also, he doesn't say learnt, but he says he was closely associated with Muthuswami Dikshitar. So there is these are just scattered references. When you read Raghavan's monograph on, Dr. V. Raghavan's monograph on Dikshitar, you realize that there were several people in the Tirunelveli area who were carrying forward the Dikshitar tradition. And you also realize that Tirunelveli people had no idea about variety in names. Kalakadu Subaya Bhagavatar, Kodaganallur Subaya Bhagavatar, Pallakurchi Subaya Bhagavatar, Vasudevanallur. I mean, you would have thought that surely some other names could have been given. But they are all there. Then we have Sri Villiputtur, that is Madavar Vilagam Muttaya Bhagavatar, not to be confused with Harikesanallur Muttaya Bhagavatar. He lived in the Setur Zamin and he is considered to be an authority on Muthuswami Dikshitar Kritis, though we don't know from where he learnt, what was his source, how did he get that information, we don't seem to know that. Paramarneri Swaminatha Iyer is acknowledged as a great source of Muthuswami Dikshitar compositions. Now, he was a disciple of Mahavaidyanatha Sivan. So are we saying that those were the compositions that came through him, or was he independently an authority on Dikshitar Kritis? We don't know. The last one is just a 4-line reference in Sulamangalam Vaidyanatha Bhagavatar's book. Kekkarai Muthu Iyer, he says, lived in Madras and performed here. It says, great authority on Dikshitar Kritis, Veena Dhanam learnt Akshaya Linga Vibho from him. This is very clearly So we all talk about the great style of rendering Akshay Linga Vibho by Brinda and all that. Some unknown, we know nothing about this man, but it is there in print. And somebody like Sulamangalam Vaidyanatha Bhagavatar writing, he would have seen them all. He would have known everybody. He was writing from personal experience. And the Rangaramanuja Iyengar has done the translation, and then he's writing in the footnote, it has to be acknowledged that her rendition of this composition is unsurpassed. And whether she polished it and brought it up to a certain level or whether it came from him, we have no idea. So this is what I have found so far. I can't, I wish I could bring it to a very clear and logical end and say this is what it happened, but the information that is available is only so much. Clearly, Dikshitar, as he traveled, left behind compositions at various places, and eventually we seem to be the repository of lots of genuine Dikshitar Kritis. Sadly, we also seem to acknowledge many fraudulent compositions as his, compositions that have no prosody, no alliteration, just the name Guru Guha, if it is present, it is acknowledged as a Dikshitar Kriti. What is also interesting is when you go through the compositions of, say, the Tanjore Quartet, and then you go through the few that are available of, say, the Ayasami Natwanar, which is Begada and all that. They seem to have followed the Dikshitar tradition of ragas. And if at all there has been a change that has come about, it is because of people who have come after them. So even in Ponnaya Pillai's publication and later the same publication reprinted by Kittappa Pillai, he is taking great pains to write the new names for instance, he says, Idai இப்பொழுது Shanmukapriya என்று கூறுகிறார்கள். So Rama Manohari, he says, Idai இப்பொழுது Ramapriya. In fact, he gives the name as Ramapriya only. Even Duni Binna Shadjam Engira Denuka. So and so alias so and so. So it is very, the impact of the Tyagaraja school and the Melakartas seem to have had their effect on Muthuswami Dikshitar's compositions. If there had been more, perhaps we would have a greater idea. But this is all that we have at this point. Thank you very much for having given me a patient here.